All right, and again, I just want to say a welcome to everyone for joining us here today on our May 30 Minutes of Excellence session. My name is Kim Meadows, and I'm the training director here at NAWB. So if you don't know, we do our 30 minutes of excellence sessions every month, and we really use this time to highlight different presenters and different expertise. We have different topics throughout the workforce field, and today we are excited to have Cal Marinelli. Cal, as you see here on the screen, he's the Associate Director of Government Relations and Policy, and he works with the National Association of Workforce Boards, or NAWB. So Cal is here to give us some great information on commenting on proposed rule changes. So I'll turn it over to Cal here in a moment, but I do want to let you know that this will be archived, and as well as the presentation will be archived on our NAWB YouTube channel. So if you're connected to us on YouTube, you can go to YouTube, type in NAWB, and this will be available in 3 days. And then Cal will also make his PowerPoint available. So we'll get that out to you all as well. So again, thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to Cal to take us the rest of the way.
Great, thanks, Kim. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for joining. And I really appreciate the invitation. As Kim said, I am the Associate Director of Government Relations and Policy at the National Association of Workforce Boards. My role really revolves around federal policy, federal advocacy, and really navigating the current federal government and ensuring that workforce boards and workforce professionals and the public workforce system in general has a voice at the table when legislators are creating new pieces of legislation and agencies are creating rules. So today I'm going to be going over how to comment on proposed rule changes, what kind of proposed rule changes are, and then writing an effective comment on a rule change. And then I'm also going to provide you some resources so that you can reference later on if you ever do find yourself in the situation of writing a comment. So as Kim said, the PowerPoint, it will be distributed afterwards for you all because there are some useful links there. But I guess I'm just going to jump right in and start off here. So let's go. All right. Within the federal landscape, there are kind of two types of laws, or one of them is a statute, which is a law that is passed by like the House of Representatives or the Senate, that are very usually, when we say general in scope, we mean that the implementation behind the actual law itself is not expanded upon. It's fairly general. So it just says, for example, within workforce, the WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, there is a provision that states a workforce board will partner with this agency or whomever. That partnership and the details behind that partnership aren't necessarily laid out within that statute, within that piece of legislation. So that is where the rules or a regulation comes in into play. That regulation and that rule is created by an agency within the executive branch, and that agency, it was given power by a statute to make these rules that act the same as a law. So again, as the screen shows, that a regulation, aka a rule, is written by agencies like the Department of Labor and really lay out the details behind a statute and the specifics of a statute. I do want to make clear too, and as you'll hear more within the actual presentation as I go over some of the case study, I guess, in a sense, you'll see that regulations can be overridden by statute. So how do we get to an actual regulation, or how do we make a rule? And an agency first really starts to develop a proposed rule after a piece of legislation is passed in Congress and signed by the president. So this regulation is usually laid out within a unified agenda as well, twice a year. And that unified agenda will show you what kind of regulations and rules different agencies are going to be expanding upon or addressing this year. Rules can also take a form in other more nuanced cases, but really random rule changes can come through. I think it's quarterly through specific agencies. So specific agencies will also release a regulatory agenda and to outline their activities for the upcoming quarter. That's all reviewed by the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs within the executive branch. That's kind of more in the weeds, but I just wanted you to all be aware of like kind of the agencies and people who are actually involved in that process. So once that rule is started to developed and laid out, we have a bunch of people in the background going to other parties and other stakeholders trying to figure out the best way to actually implement that regulation and the easiest way to get that get those procedures on paper. Then once that process is finished, they will publish a proposed rule within the Federal Register. That proposed rule is called an NPRM, or it's a notice of the proposed rulemaking, and it is published. New rules are published daily on the Federal Register, where the public can go review them, gain more information, and also provide comments to the on the actual regulation. It's usually between, the comment periods are usually between 30 to 60 days, but I mean, there's been longer comment periods, there's been shorter comment periods. It really depends on the agency and the urgency, I guess, of the rule or the notice. You'll also see within the Federal Register where all of these proposals are sent, you'll see that it's not just full of rules. There's also other notices of like funding availability, of meetings. There's also information requests. So an agency may ask for a request that you do comment on a certain topic because they're gathering information to actually draft a proposed rule. After the agency does publish that rule, though, the agency will review all comments, and they're required by statute to actually review all those comments, all the data, the opinions, facts, etc., throughout the regulatory process, and respond to all those comments. They can respond to the comment by grouping comments together that cover the same subject and address them that way. But they have to address every single comment that you have or that they have put on the actual rule itself, and consider any alternatives that are proposed by commenters. And at the same time, when they do propose, or when they start to consider some of these other solutions, or if they even consider not changing the rule at all, they can decide to terminate the rulemaking process at that time and just not move forward. So after that comment period ends, instead of issuing a final rule, they can kind of just leave it in regulatory limbo, we call it, and do nothing with it. No one at an agency is allowed to speak about it really, or provide details on when a final rule would actually come out. And it's kind of just goes into a black box, and that's it. And then it's done. After that, then after the next Congress comes, it kind of gets wiped clean. So if something was proposed in the 118th, or sorry, if the next administration comes in and scraps it, they can then it would get out of the black box. But it takes a little bit, and usually it doesn't come through all the way. So it's a little complicated once it hits that. But and the reason why I'm harping on this is just because, again, as part of the case study that I'm going to be explaining, that is part of it, and why I wanted to make sure that you understood that it's really a really gray area. So finally, once an agency does decide to publish a final rule, the rule has to be within scope and a logical outgrowth of that proposed rule, and again has to respond to all those significant issues that are raised within comments. Screen. And of course, give me 1 second here. I apologize for this. I don't know why this is.
Cal, do you want me to pull it up from my screen?
If you could, I'd appreciate that.
I can.
Ooh. Let me stop sharing. These computers. I stop.
Okay, Cal, I'll pull it up from my screen. So give me 1 second.
Yep.
And you can
Thank
just
you.
tell me. Let's see. And you can just tell me when to move forward. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, I am.
All right, perfect. So we are
So,
here.
yep, next slide. All right, so some of the reasons why we like to comment, really, I mean, it's mostly a complement to your advocacy efforts, and should be a part of your advocacy strategy. It really provides regulators with information to improve their regulations. All agencies have to, again, respond to all comments, and then it is also not considered a lobbying activity. And telling other people to comment on a regulation is not a lobbying activity, which I know with a lot of our members, with other boards, they get kind of hung up between advocacy and lobbying, and don't even do any kind of advocacy activities because they don't want to be considered doing lobbying activities. This is not one of those. So it's a good example and a good thing to get into the habit of actually commenting on, because it can supplement more of your advocacy efforts. So some of the case study stuff that I was talking about here, in last year, the Department of Labor proposed a rule that would eliminate Wagner-Peiser staffing from local boards within a few different states. So within Massachusetts, Colorado, Michigan, and Delaware. That in turn would cause a huge decrease in funding for a lot of these boards. So obviously everybody was very concerned with it, NAWB being one of those entities. And what we did is we, utilizing the commenting and regulatory process, we were able to successfully counter that rule change by asking a bunch of members to comment. We got over 1,000 comments. We were able to also gain bipartisan support in Congress to oppose a rule if a final rule were to come down. So again, going back to that whole statute versus regulation, that's where statutes, the lawmaking process, can override a rule set out by the Department of Labor or by any other agency. That's why it's important to understand both of them, and that's how they interact with each other. So again, there's another link to our actual comment here. And it's a really good one for you to review to get a good feeling on, because it is very relevant to the work that you all do. And it's able to show that rules do impact people at the ground level pretty significantly. So if we want to move on to the next slide, really effective commenting comes down to really reading and understanding the proposal, and what people are saying and who your audience is. I mean, there is a multitude of different ways for you to comment on something, for one thing to be one way to comment to compared to another way to comment when looking at like certain I guess if you were commenting on like the Bureau of Labor Statistics rule, your comment may be more, they need to be more technical in scope, just because the actual material itself isn't technical in scope as well. So it's really dependent upon the rule itself, but generally speaking, you really need to understand who your audience is and what their constraints are. So for example, going back to the Wagner-Peiser issue, our audience, the Department of Labor, was really, I guess, being pushed by a lot of unions to, some major unions, to put this rule into place, because some of these unions did not represent local employees. And that's where that pressure was coming in from. So what we were in some of their arguments also were speaking to the actual performance of the unemployment system during the pandemic. And what we did effectively is countered that by pulling out other statistics, referencing successes during the pandemic within Michigan, Colorado, and Massachusetts, and showing that that system that was currently in place was actually more beneficial than the other system that they had before. So understanding that where the pressures are within the Department of Labor to explain and take advantage of to make your comment more effective is something that you should look at. If you need supports on understanding who your audience is and some of those key players, talk to whoever deals with policy or government relations in your organization. If there's nobody, ask me, I'm happy to help you out. But yes, there are a lot of other items here too. So like answering all the questions, all the requests within the prompt, you really need to make sure that you cite all your sources and provide concrete, specific arguments that are, I guess, citable. So not Wikipedia, as a lot of the teachers would say, not Wikipedia, studies that are supported through scientific and research based evidence. And then if you're commenting on a rule too, whether you oppose the rule or support the rule, if you're opposing the rule, you really need to provide alternatives or changes to that rule. And then if you support it, you also need to provide precise reasoning and highlight the positive impacts of that rule change that it would have on you or the populations that you serve. Also, telling others about your comment, that's gonna be an effective way to integrate this into your advocacy strategy. If we want to move on to the next slide. So comment structure, again, there's a good example that we had here at the bottom that is annotated by MIT's communication lab. You need to include specific numbers and references within your header. I won't go into too much detail on there just because it's laid out here. But again, introduction, executive summary, why you're commenting, why who you're commenting on behalf of, because you can comment on as an organization, as a coalition, as an individual, or even anonymously. And then you also need to list some of your relevant experiences or credentials. Next, you're going to be talking about your major concerns. This is going to be the meat of your comment, and lay out kind of those detailed arguments that we said before were very necessary for you to have throughout any credible comment. You can't just be like, oh, well, it's going to hurt people if you implement this rule. It's not really measurable. They want a measurable statistic or reason behind why it would actually hurt an individual. And then finally, a conclusion, reiterate recommendations and impacts, and then provide any contact information, and always offer to discuss it further with these individuals, and put out a branch, an olive branch, telling them that you're willing to speak with them if they have any further questions. And then again, MIT's communications lab has a good annotated example. If you want to move to the next slide, and this is going to be our last one, but all of those kind of mechanics behind submitting a comment is done through either the Federal Register or regulations.gov. Usually the Federal Register has a link where you can actually go in and comment and provide a comment right there, and it will automatically submit it to regulations.gov, where all comments are housed and all regulations are housed. If not, you can go to regulations.gov, type in the docket, RIN, or actual document number, and then pull it up there and comment through that thing, through that user interface. Remember, comment periods aren't uniform. Just remember when they are to look at the Federal Register where it will cite that. The comment can actually include attachments. I think it's up to 20 attachments. So it can also be submitted as a PDF. So you can just write it in Word and then export it. Really be mindful of including confidential information, as most comments aren't public. However, some comments are not public and must be sent to a specific entity. So that would be stated within the instructions. I'm just making you all aware of how that would play out. And then once submitted, you'll get a confirmation email and a comment tracking number. So after that, the next steps are just to tell people about it and really integrate this into your advocacy strategy. The next slide is just a resources that you'll be able to access. And then finally, I just want to say thank you all for inviting me and allowing me to talk about this issue. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
All right, thank you, Kyle. Thank you for all that. Oh, that's some great information. And again, this will be archived on our YouTube channel. But we did want to save the last 5 minutes and open it up for anybody who has any questions for Kyle. And so we can go ahead and pick his brain while we have him here for the next 5 minutes. So if you have anything, go ahead and type that into the chat box. Or you can take yourself off of mute as well. Feel free to come off of mute and just ask the question. And again, the PowerPoint slides will be available with all of the links that Kyle had on the PowerPoint. So there are live links. You can just go to the link and click on those. And it's some great case studies there, as he was talking about, as well as some other resources.
So Malik asked whether what is an example of a situation where comments might not be public, and would they ever become public? An example is, in some cases, and the reason why I've seen some of this is just because workforce development spans across so many different industries, but a lot of the defense, obviously there's a lot of the defense stuff is not public and probably will not become public. I don't know the case where it does become public. I can follow up with you and see the actual whether that is actually true or not. If it never becomes public, but it's usually within like the defense space, or sometimes even within energy. I've also seen, but that's more for like some of the nuclear power energy systems and things like that. But yes, it may be it may be become public, but I don't. I'm almost positive it does not.
Thank
And
you, Malik, for that question.
I also just want to say if you have any other questions too, you can feel free to like take my email and email me. I'm more than happy to answer any of the questions that you have.
All right, any other questions for Kyle? All right, Kyle, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. It looks like we have a thank you here. And so I just want to reiterate that as well. So thank you for taking the time out, all of you all, for joining us here today to get this very important information. This is probably the first time I've actually sat through a training on how to comment on proposed rules. So just you pulling this information together has been very valuable. And even the way you had the commenting structure laid out and just that framework of how we can just go in and plug in that information. So that's been really great. Again, if you have any questions for Kyle after our presentation, after his presentation today, you can definitely email him. And then also this will be available on our NAWB YouTube channel within 3 to 5 business days. All right. So we hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your Wednesday. We look forward to seeing you all again soon. And again, check us out at nawb.org if you have any questions or comments for our NAWB team as well. So thank you all. Thank you again, Kyle. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Kim.